Got a few different topics here. The first one's going to be the Liberator Q&A and kind of building upon my previous Liberator videos, talking about how these changes impact your ship, or if you're considering this ship in the future, buying it in game or on the store, what you need to expect and plan for. Also, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe. I make content like this all the time. I really appreciate that. And if you have any comments and feedback, it's always appreciated either here right below in the comments or on Discord at RegA, #0001. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The Liberator Q&A was released today on Wednesday, which is the 20th of October. Now, with the way things were asked by the community, which remember you can always go on the spectrum and take part in these Q&As, we got some pretty big surprises. One of which was the walkback of the refueling. So in the ship talk, which is one of the main source that I based, along with the sale page that I based my Liberator video, the Double Deck Herc video on, and also my first look videos, I've cited the refueling that was listed here on the page during the ship talk. There was this first concept. Notice it's different than this ship. Notice it actually had the missiles, interestingly, at the beginning, and the turrets were there, but they're still formulating exactly how big the ship was, what it was. This was obviously a one-deck ship, although it still had the ramp concepts. But right here, large auxiliary fuel tank to allow the transporter to supply vehicles in transit. This feature is not in the Liberator any longer. On the full-on Liberator, it has these tanks are decorative, in the words of the crew. They has very large quantum and hydrogen tanks. So hydrogen being the normal fuel to just move around, quantum being the quantum travel, moving it with the B key between long, extremely long distances across massive systems like Pyro or just across Stanton. But they are saying that you will need to use the store area, which is like basically here on the newer ship in that area, 400 SCU of storage area, and then that can be brought over by via trolleys or hand carried or other mechanisms like repair and refueling bots that have that capability. Uh, but do note that we've done some research, and the community is quick to point out that the Carrack has the ability to refuel its Pisces, and it listed just like other ships that have hangars on board. The internal part of this ship, it's not all external, is able to hold two extra small vehicles, all the way up to Novas and Ballista, and also extra small, or extra small technically, ships inside this area. So if this area is considered a hangar, then even if it was not supposed to have refueling capacity built in from the refueling tanks on the ship's very large hydrogen stores and quantum stores on board, you that may be something that you can be doing in the future. However, these pads that are external, the one in the front, the two in the back, those would not have like a dedicated system where you can land and then hit the refuel services button like you could imagine you would have on something like an Idris. So this is interesting because in my previous video, I tempered expectations by pointing out that repairs and rearming would be a very basic level. Yes, some of the areas are internal, which makes it far easier to work on ships or vehicles. However, you would be limited to hand tools and whatever you could fit on a trolley or cart or with a tractor beam. Now, there is, interestingly, a tractor beam, which they mention in this Q&A. Uh, so it's a shame they're not like next to each other. That would have been nicer. But they mention that there is a tractor beam that is designed to move the ships around on the ship. So I feel like this is not as big of a deal as some will probably make it out to be, like as if it won't have any services at all and it's the end of the world or something. And that's not the case. You still have the 400 SCU of cargo. It is internalized, so it's protected, a lot like other ships. And most importantly, it is something that will be there regardless of what the intention was meant to be. That nobody says you can't fill that 400 SCU with fuel systems, tanks. And we know that there will be tanks that can hold fuel. We know that there will be ways to handle those things. Uh, the team also mentioned discussing ways to lock down pads and forcibly detach ships if they're unwanted visitors. And based on that discussion, there was also a mention in the Q&A of the uh, the tractor beam, which it is mounted on a deployable compartment on the passenger side of the vehicle. So that would be the right side if you're facing the front of the Liberator. On the right side, where the 16 jump seats are, where the pilots' areas are, where the passengers that are pilots are, those kind of ready room areas, that's where that would be, just under the remote upper turret. And in the Q&A, they point out that this allows it to have range over the external pads to aid with the landing and removal of ships. So the main way, other than just shooting them with the size 5 dual turret, that you have of kind of imposing the crew's needs on the ships on board, you also will have a very large utility tractor beam on board that can move those extra small ships and, by extension, anything extra small, from the ship. Obviously, it would not be able to hit the internal areas with that beam. However, everything external would be fair game. Now, what's interesting about this is that opens up a lot of doors for you to non-violently handle issues. So if you have a contract dispute, somebody's already on the ship, they've parked their vehicle, they parked their craft. If you keep them on the external and you explain to them, you're already taking off and such, and they refuse to pay or they don't pay enough, you can literally refund them whatever they paid and just tractor beam them off of there. That is the way I am inferring that this tractor beam system is supposed to work. Now, we've heard discussions in the past about what if a ship has its shields up versus not. Can the tractor beam operate? Can it not? They did not go into that during this discussion, but it is interesting. Now, also on the topic of shields, they did mention on this Liberator Q&A that the shields, the SDF brand new shield systems that are something new for 2021, that they've been constantly working on, are going to be on this ship. And just like every other ship, by the way. But those SDF shields are designed to be multiple meters above the ship they end at. So that means that the shields will relatively protect the external ships. And that's not my words, that's CIG's. Now, what's interesting about that topic is if you keep to the rules and you're keeping extra small ships and extra small ships on the pads, then those extra multiple meters of ship hull, that the shield goes above the ship's hull, will practically cover the entire ship. If you look at a Hornet when it's sitting on its landing gears, it is a few meters high. It is not something that's 10 meters high, 15 meters high. However, they also mention the same applies to the Kraken and any other ships where vehicles are stored on the interior. So what we're seeing in this Q&A with the new SDF shield tech coming into this Q&A for the Liberator actually gave a stealth buff to the Kraken. One of the arguments against the Kraken was despite it having capital shields, it was told in its Q&A, strangely. It's funny how these things come in parallels. A couple of years ago, we were told by the Kraken Q&A that you would need to keep the vehicles online because the shields would not of the ship would not protect the vehicles on the pads. And that was one of the big arguments for the Idris. And it's still, to be fair, the Idris has military class armor between and shields and capital shields between its vehicles it keeps inside. It's three small pads and the external forces that be, the powers that be outside. However, the Kraken can fit 4 Buccaneer-sized ships and then 2 medium ships, such as Cutlasses and Freelancers and such, without issue. And this SDF shield tech, multiple meters above the ship hull of capital shielding, despite not having armor, that's a big buff. That is a huge buff because even those medium ships, a decent chunk of them would be protected by that capital class shield. So that means it would be much harder to kill them off. Would you leave them online? I sure as heck would, without their engines on when they're sitting on the Kraken's decks, when they're sitting on the Liberator's decks. However, it is reassuring that you have that coverage on ships that you are promising safe haven to. Their crews can be more confident of visiting your services inside, of being able to leave their cockpits without the fear that at any moment they could get sucker punched off the deck. And that's something I think that is very useful. As long as they trust the driver, the organization that is running the Liberator or the Kraken, etc., they will be confident that they will have at least a fair shake at things and a pretty safe assumption to say they'll make it to their destination. And if they do have to fight, they'll have a few moments to get to their ship and take part in the fight fairly. And that's a really cool thing. So they mention once again the refueling, rearming, repairing. They mention all three by name, and they say that they will only use supplies stored in the cargo bay. There is no dedicated facilities or separate stores. As I led off with, it is a major change in theory, but when you really think about it, this ship is so versatile, and the stores are literally next to the internal pads and the external pad. If you open the door at the front, the large gate, you start wondering how much of that would really be critical. Interesting as well, they mentioned that you could put, in theory, land vehicles on the top of the ship. However, if that large gate at the front of the ship was broken, that is between the extra small pads and the small pads above them, lead to the double decker part, there would be no method really to get them down. So if you were going to a place like Yella that has 1/6 gravity, and you don't have the means to repair that in the field, that big door, it would be less of a risk, and it may be actually kind of fun to try to drop the vehicles down into that lower pad and then onto the ramp below that. Hopefully that's still around. But if you're on, say, a large planet that has serious gravity, like if I'm thinking of, I'm really thinking of if you're touching down outside of Lorville and you're kicking a huge planet like Hurston around, you're going to hurt. Even in a cyclone or something small designed to take a hit, designed to take a shock drop, a drop like that, it's going to be a big surprise. Another thing they hammered home was that the size of the extra small pads on top, the two upper landing pads, was designed for the Saber, the Anvil Hornet, the Arrow. They pictured those size ships, and they mention as well that the Misk Prospector will just fit onto that location. So that's another nice little buff that was already there, but it's something worth confirming for those who are more indie minded or more utility minded of the crowd. Being able to put two prospectors on the top of that ship, plus say an MPUF cargo on the front to haul their goods back and forth to the ship, and then a couple ROCs inside, and 400 SCU for all the mining equipment, is a really nice little mining operation, especially if you have a hauler or two that are zipping back and forth, like the Argo Cargo or something that has a quantum drive if you're longer distance operations. I can see this thing being very useful for those type of operations, almost like a mining barge, something that you can take out into the field and really deploy all sorts of mining equipment from. It'd be cool. And it's something I think outpost operations would be really nice for. Something where you can spend a day out there and then bring everybody back and they crash at the outpost. So that's kind of where I'm at with the utility, and that's as far as they went with the utility side of things. Now, they did change the concept of this ship from a capital to a large ship, and I think this is kind of a moot point. It is a quasi-capital because of that larger jump drive, quantum drive, that is able to stand up with the best of them and the huge fuel tanks on board to make these large warps, these large quantum jumps that are rivaling capital ships. They even had to go out of their way to point out, oh, well, the Idris and the Kraken have double the size of fuel tanks. And it's like, okay, that's nice, but really it's doing the same job. If it can make it across all of a massive system like Pyro and beyond, it's doing something right. And it's kind of fulfilling that idea that a lot of players have. And one of the main reasons I hear people say they want a cap ship is to support their org, support their friends at long distance. So that's kind of an interesting factor that I think is kind of over. Once again, we're doing shades shading of like a graph with a graphite pencil of a black and white image with gray areas here. We're kind of just shading in the factors, kind of supporting what this ship can and cannot do and what it can't complete. So one of the things that is controversial was that people have already been posting up many pictures of mock-ups of this ship or and such with vehicles on top that are too big or too many to be in theory officially supported. And the way CIG pointed this out was officially they will not be supported that you could put a large ship on the two extra small pads on top. However, and it won't be able to spawn there. But what players do after the initial spawn is up to them. So while we can surely play Tetris with larger ships onto the landing pads, it will likely not be supported as an official method of landing. So what they're saying is when the ship spawns, so you go to an ASOP terminal and you open it up, you should be able to pre-configure it with different ships to be put on top. It will not allow that. If you log in, this is something we're going to need to confirm, but it will likely not allow that large ship to pop in with the Liberator on and the large ship then on top of it. It would just be the Liberator. You would not have that large ship you left on top. So I see this as CIG like saying, look, you do what you want, but understand that if there's gravity effects on a large planet and the Liberator isn't able to handle all the extra weight you're slapping on it, so be it. But if you stay to space and you move in areas with low gravity or in space and you basically are making the transport and getting it off, good for you. I think that's really what we're dealing with here. I strongly suspect that you will be able to quantum and move around locally with that large ship on top, or at the very least a medium ship on top. It's funny how they said large ships. It's really, that part I think really conflates this. I think people are more looking at a medium class ship to squeeze on top, maybe even two. And that would really make it valuable. Once again, one of the big selling features of the Krakens are that they have two medium pads. It's a big deal to be able to take a larger ship. Even I'm using the word now. But I'm trying to be careful. This ship itself is supposed to be a large ship. That's how different large ships can be from each other. A Connie is a larger ship than than a Freelancer or a Cutlass. It's significantly bigger, but it's still nowhere near the size of a Hercules or even or especially not a Liberator. Just to give you some perspective, which are supposedly now large ships. I see the Liberator as a quasi-capital. It is large basically to fit through large jump points and large hangars and such. It'll fit in, and that's about the biggest reason it's called a large. If they want to call it a large or they want to call it a quasi-cap, they want to call it a capital, I don't care what its official designation is. To me, this is a quasi-capital logistics vessel that does the job of just cap logistics very well, and it doesn't bring anything else to the table like a traditional cap would. So if it's a one-minded ship, and that's fine. And in fact, that's cool. They did clarify that it has medium to heavy armor to offset its relatively sparse weaponry and allow it to take a beating while it's transporting vehicles. That is actually a huge a dent to the M2 Hercules. In my previous video, I made the argument that the M2 Hercules would be nice because it has that heavy armor, and the heavy armor is something it pays dearly for. Its SCU storage space is down, and remember, if it's storing stuff in its main hold on its bottom floor, it is not able to fit vehicles, or it has to combination it. It loses some of its SCUs for vehicles at the very least. So now, with the Liberator able to have the storage area, 400 SCU, off to the side, and then you also have that vehicle space, which you may be able to put things in the Q&A they mention, that won't be officially supported, like it won't be tied down, so to speak, it won't be gravity locked or anything like that, but you do what you want, is what they just keep saying over and over again in the Q&A. And reading between the lines here, I believe space-based operations for the Liberators will be hugely overweight, and that's kind of funny. The M2 could probably pull the same trick and put more SCU of cargo in there, because remember, you can hand load it in the future and really squeeze as much as possible out and make the same argument for the M2 and say, look, I can put as much as I can put in a C2 in the M2 because that armor's weight doesn't really matter in space. In space, but the minute you go into Atmo, you're going to have a problem. You won't be able to safely land, or at least comfortably land, and trying to take back off will be impossible. So if you overweight the Liberator, I think it's going to be the same deal. It's going to be like, look, you can take it into Atmo all you want. You can take it around space all you want overloaded, but the minute you put it in Atmo, you better be in the tolerances that are needed to be. Or you're going to have a very interesting flight down. You might have a single landing and not get back up for that landing. But the medium heavy armor, I think, is something very interesting. They're trying to be careful about leaving it weak spots. So I would be very cautious about that. They mentioned that the new those fuel tanks that are on the side that we thought were auxiliary fuel tanks or just whatnot. They said, look, those are for sure show. They're rule of cool type fuel tanks. So that's fine. But if you're gonna make them rule of cool fuel tanks, and you're taking away its main ability to kind of have like a menu that allows you to instantly refuel or some type of nozzles out of the wall or something, you need to give it something back. I see this armor as something that really gives it something back. And it also, I like the fact the fuel tanks are decorative if it doesn't allow refueling surfaces, because those tanks are not fully covered by armor. So the last thing I want is exposed fuel tanks on the side of my vehicle, on the side of my ship. I think of in World of Tanks, my KV-1S, I think what I had for a long time, and I just things set on fire every 5 minutes because the fuel tanks were like on the right side of the tank outside, and it was like, whose genius idea was this? But especially on an armored ship that's designed to deliver vehicles. I also think it's interesting that they're wording it that the medium and heavy armor is there on the sparsely weaponized platform to allow it to do its job, which translates more to me that this is meant to be closer to war zones than we expected. I mentioned a few times in a few of my Kraken videos that the Kraken is not really meant to be like in a slugfest in a fleet fight. It's more on the periphery. It's meant to deploy its fighters, its bombers, its support craft, and then get out of Dodge. Like and then come back and pick them up and refuel, rearm, send out search and rescue, whatever it needs to do. But it's not meant to stay. It's single size 7 pair of turret with a pair of size 7 guns is really meant to keep those pads clear of bad people and stop boarding issues, and kind of be the sheriff, so to speak, in town of the side of the ship that allows access. That's really what the turret's meant to be. It's also meant to be a last line of defense. If the fighters, the bombers, the support vehicles, the utility ships have failed, that is when you start using the turrets on board the Kraken. Nothing should be that close to that carrier. And the Kraken is a true capital class carrier. This is a quasi-capital transporter carrier to me. I think they're trying to distance themselves from the light carrier concept on this ship, but just because it doesn't have services, I feel like it has a lot of the same philosophies of a Kraken. This does not belong on the front lines of a war zone or a slugfest on a fleet fight, but it does belong on the edges. It's one of these where you test if your scouting is good enough, if your skills of your organization are strong enough, being able to deploy org mates and or get them out of a problem is going to be very useful for the Liberator. I think just because it's mainly going to be useful for peacetime and for logistics moves between fights does not mean it doesn't have a place in a battlefield. It's just it's over there somewhere. It's not in the middle of the the fur ball that's in the middle of a fight. That's my point. You know, there's other ships that are meant for that. This ship does not have the PDSs. It does not have the array of man turrets. It does not have the ability to handle the incoming hits as well as some other ships. And but it is a nice ship. It is from Anvil. I think their medium and heavy armor is going to be a nice touch for this ship. I like that it has 2 engines instead of just one. I've been a proponent of that for a while, that clusters of engines is a good idea, not just one, in case one is shot out or it has a mechanical failure. I also like that factor that there's multiple arrays of things on this ship that seem to treat itself well for operations on the edges of space. I think with its dual engine philosophy, its seriously large fuel tanks that seem to be internalized now that they've said the side fuel tanks are just for show. So let's take things a little lighter here. We have a couple smaller things now that we're done talking about the Liberator Q&A. We had an update to This Week in Star Citizen, very exciting. On Friday, there will be a Alpha 315 Star Citizen Live. It's focused on everything to do with Alpha 315, run by Todd Pappy and Richard Tyrer, two folks who have a lot of passion and drive for the Alpha and on the PU. Very exciting. Can't wait to see it. And hopefully by that point, we'll have a 315 PTU new patch. That's kind of, I'm sure, in the pipeline. And also, we have a roadmap roundup, and these will be linked below this, as well as the Q&A, of course, if you missed that. And always remember, you can go on the RSI website, go to the com link section right on the front page. Everything I talk about's there. But yeah, it'll also be linked below. So we had the Origin X1 added the progress tracker, which is not a surprise, especially with all the attention I'm sure it's getting now that it was told that that's really what the front elevator of the 400i was designed for, that bike storage area. The 400i has its discussion that it was basically made a deliverable from unannounced as a surprise, and a new thing that at least I didn't know about until recently, Rastar. Developing and implementing Rastar, a tool of the placement of modular structures onto planet surfaces, including deformation of surrounding terrain to accommodate it. This will eventually be used by players to place their own structures, such as with the Consolidated Outland Pioneer. It's very hard for me to say that because usually I just call it Konyu. But yeah, so Pioneer is a very exciting ship. Seeing a tool like this, that's a necessary thing for a very exciting niche capital class ship that is really essential for the future of Outpost, is very exciting. And just like the A2 was put out to basically be the destroyer of sandcastles, we need to be able to build our own sandcastles for the A2 to be that much more critical and useful. So this is kind of where I'm at right now, is kind of picturing this is one more building block in place to make the Pioneers project possible. And this brings a lot more questions for the end of 2022 and of 2023 about where the Pioneer will be at that point. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But this is one more thing that's very cool. There was some interesting stuff at CitizenCon showing the development of placing structures and such. Really cool stuff. If you get a chance, you should check out all those videos. But yeah, I might do some more videos on this in the future if people show interest. Hopefully, we can get some more information as that is more fleshed out. But at CitizenCon, they made clear that they're going to have NPC outposts that are like habitations, like so very, very basic setups that are going to be at least 50 of them being developed. And most of Pyro is going to be covered in these things, as I understand it, where they will have different modules. So they're called social modules, trade modules. And that mission that we saw at Star Citizen CitizenCon was basically an outpost that was in this concept. There, as a reminder, there's 6 different styles of outposts. The roadmap is covering 2 different types of outposts, the independent and the outlaw outposts types. And there will be eventually 6 different kinds. So very exciting stuff. Everything that they're developing for NPCs now, much further down the line, will be available for players. And the Pioneer is the building block that most players will be using. As another reminder, recently CIG discussed that the Pioneer is not the only method to build outposts. At the very least, basic outposts will be able to be built by very expensive modules that can be brought over in regular haulers. But the Pioneer would be the more efficient and smarter way to do it. The Pioneer being like the 3D printer that prints the module pieces on site, and then they can be moved into place at the building location. The entire ship does not have to physically take off and land every 5 feet to build. Even though, no matter how big it is, it's not big enough to build an entire outpost on spot, at least based on the last interpretation I had of the videos explaining how it would work. It basically 3D prints the parts, like literally next to the job site, and then they are basically trucked over to the job site. So that is very exciting. I can't wait to see more information about that. And I hope that some of those first NPC outposts would be cool to see, ones that are damaged, ones that are under construction or failed construction projects, so we can actually see some insights into how they're built and I think that would make the world that much more exciting. A lot like how Pyro has damaged stations, and where asteroids hit them and broke them apart, or strife internally caused damage, or they had failed projects by companies that long don't exist anymore. Very exciting stuff, and it would be kind of a really cool feature, I think, of the outpost, and really give them more character. So Santok Yai, that's my best try. I promise I'm not going to say it again. Is currently under reevaluation, so it was removed from Progress Tracker, unfortunately. And in the release view, of course, the 400i is out. It's being balanced and reworked and changed as necessary. So tweaking more like. I am not going to weigh in on the vehicles that go underneath, except just mention that the latest build will, as I understand it, not have the ROC or the Cyclone MT able to fit any longer. And that is something I think that is still in flux. But CIG is kind of leaning that direction to stay that way until they can figure something else out. There was too much change in the landing gears, but that's as far as I'm going to weigh in on that. So once that comes in, I will test it, certainly test it, and really, really put it through its paces. And the shops and patrons were moved to 3.16, and additional time for polish is important, but I think this is just a bigger symptom of the AI is not quite up to par yet. The patrons walking around the store, I don't think were that big of a deal, but shopkeepers having different emotions they go through and all those different things probably was too much on the AI system to be trusted. That's my suspicion and speculation on that last part. But based on what I've seen AI in action right now, even in 3.15 PTU, as of the patch that we're on right now, I think it's patch M or something. But that's something that is always going to be an ongoing fight when it comes to the game. CIG has said many times, we'll have AI that's incredible, absolutely incredible, behaves too well, and then we put it out in the field on a 50-player server, out in normal latency and normal server standards and such, and then the difficulties start. So especially when they have to pop in and pop out to allow computers to not have to work on as much and servers to work on as much. So it's very interesting stuff. And finally, I have a bit of a surprise. This is speculation, but a good kind. So this is the weird thing that shipped that SC Tracker, a great organization. They have their own Discord. They have their own website. And anyone can put it on their Discord. Not an advertisement. I don't really know the people who run it, but they're kind of like one of those backbone of this community that's run by the community groups. And they saw something very interesting in the CCU system. So not in the regular ship system, but the CCU system, they saw this weird little blip, so to speak. Now this was all on Tuesday into Wednesday. They had the Sentokyai. Sorry, I did say it again. If I'm mispronouncing it, my mistake. And I think the last time we talked about that ship, the Yai part just means that it's human. The actual first part is the ship name, if I remember right. So like that, like even they went out of their way to make the name even harder to say. I try to respect any ship's builders and the alien groups they're from. Anyway, they were added and removed instantly from the CCU system. The Blade was added and removed from the CCU system. The Prowler was removed. The Asperiad Talon was removed. The Shrike in particular. And the M2 Hercules was added and removed. This is interesting because in the past, sometimes we've seen added and removed like this as a test bed to see if they could work out the kinks of a new price or for a future sale. And most of these ships tend to be either alien or have alien influences. So it could be possible that there's going to be a surprise sale soon for alien ships. I'm not saying expect it. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying this is very interesting, and this is something that people like me notice and take note of. Why is this being developed? It could just be literally laying the groundwork for the annual sale in late November. Could be, but it's very early for that to be the case. So I just thought I'd mention it as a little add-on. I'm going to try to add on more of these little things when I keep my ear to the ground and see different things. Um, and remember, if they do a sale, it doesn't mean there will be a price hike, but it could mean they're doing some type of modification to the ships, at least in the CCU system, to make sure it works right. That could be one of the reasons. All of these are not a mistake, and if you look at the timestamps, look at how many of them are spread out over the course of quite a while. That's a U.S. time zone, by the way, just to give you some perspective, just in case you're wondering, when is this actually happening? And once again, I'm not affiliated or recommend or don't recommend any product, but these folks, I keep an eye on their feed. It's very interesting. So that's all I have for you today. I wanted to thank you for getting this far. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and comments below, feedback. I literally read every single one. I try to answer as many as I can if there's any questions or thoughts or concerns, and offer good feedback is always appreciated. And thank you. Fly safe.